It's Thursday, September 24th. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blancolirio channel, and it's time for a long overdue and highly anticipated 737 MAX update. There's not been a lot to report on the 737 MAX in the last series of months, as Boeing and the FAA are busy getting this aircraft back to service. But let's review to date what it is that the FAA and Boeing is doing to get the Boeing 737 back into service. And the water cooler bet around the Blancolirio channel has been, who's going to get back on line sooner? Is it going to be me on the Boeing 777? I got a check ride coming up next month. Or will it be the Boeing 737 MAX? But first, on September 16th, the final committee report on the design, development, and certification of the Boeing 737 MAX came out from the Chair of the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, Pete DeFazio. I approached this report with some trepidation, being a product of Congress, but I found it to be an outstanding report. 237 pages long, goes into all the sordid details of the entire 737 MAX saga. It's well worth your time in reviewing and reading if you are interested in the entire background and history. It dives well into the history of the 737 MAX, why this design even came to fruition in the first place, what happened with the crashes, and what happened behind the scenes there at Boeing with the development of the Boeing 737 MAX, and also explains what happened to the FAAs and the FAA DARs and how those organizations worked and how they didn't work. So I'll post a link to this in the comment section or in the description down below. You got to check it out, the House report on the 737 MAX. Now let's go see what Boeing is specifically doing to fix the 737 MAX at this time. Over at Boeing on the 737 site, they've got the 737 MAX software update. It starts out with the overview of what I've been saying on this channel this whole time. The Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, Mcas, flight control law was designed and certified for the 737 MAX to enhance the pitch stability of the airplane so that it feels and flies like other 737s. Now, this has often been misconstrued in the media as being saying that the 737 MAX is an inherently unstable design, which is not true. It is simply there to make the 737 MAX aircraft handle and feel like previous iterations of the Boeing 737 so that the 737 MAX can be flown by the same pilots that already have an existing 737 type rating, thus saving on training costs. Mcas is designed to activate in manual flight with the airplane's flaps up and at elevated angle of attack, AOA. So the whole idea of Mcas is to add a little bit of nose down, add a little bit of back pressure so that the feel of the yoke feels similar to previous iterations of the 737 MAX under conditions of high power settings and high AOA with the underslung engines of the new design. The new engines on the 737 MAX. Boeing has developed the Mcas software update to provide additional layers of protection if the AOA sensors provide erroneous data. And this is done in conjunction with the FAA and the Worthiness Directive, which we'll get to in a moment. The additional layers of protection that are being proposed include: flight control system will now compare inputs from both AOA sensors. We've talked about this before. The original Mcas system only used data from one single AOA sensor and then switched over to the other AOA sensor system at the conclusion of the flight. Now it'll be using both AOA sensors simultaneously, and with the change in the flight control laws of the flight computers will be analyzing the outputs of each AOA, and if there's a disagreement, it's gonna throw the failing AOA out, use the existing AOA, and turn Mcas off. If the sensors disagree by 5.5 degrees or more with the flaps retracted, Mcas will not activate. An indicator on the flight deck display will alert the pilots. If Mcas is activated in non-normal conditions, it will only provide one input for each elevated AOA event. In other words, if you're actually stalling the aircraft and MCAS is working as designed, it'll only now give you one nose down nudge of the stick. It won't be allowed to continually drive the nose down. By the way, this is going back to the original design that MCAS, that they designed for MCAS, which was subsequently modified. Well, you'll just have to read the whole full report, but it was subsequently modified, and there was too much power given to the MCAS system, and nobody really knew about it or understood it. There are no known or envisioned failure conditions where MCAS will provide multiple inputs, so MCAS can only give you one shot of nose down trim in a high AOA, high power setting. MCAS can never command more stabilizer input than can be counteracted by the flight crew pulling back on the column. The pilots will continue to always have the ability to override MCAS and manually control the airplane. You override MCAS by doing the runaway stabilizer trim procedure and turn the stab trim cutout switches to cut out. We continue to work with the FAA and other regulatory agencies on the certification of the software update, and that's where the Airworthiness Directive comes into play. We'll check that out next. But the other thing that everybody's working on right now is how much training are pilots going to be required to have in order to fly the 737 MAX. That still has yet to be resolved. They've got to take pilots from around the world, put them in the training cab, the 737 MAX simulator, give them a series of scenarios and see how they react, and from this data input come up with a training course, a differences training course, which will include simulator flying along with computer-based training. To earn a Boeing 737 type rating certificate, pilots must complete 21 or more days of instructor-led academics and simulator training. That's if you've never flown a Boeing 737 aircraft at all before. That's what a new type rating entails, a minimum of 21 days of training. By the way, I'm going back to the Boeing 777. I'm going to be getting an abbreviated training schedule because I already have a type rating. I just got to get requalified in it. In preparing for a safe return to service for the MAX, Boeing has proposed a comprehensive training package with new training requirements that will be evaluated and validated by regulators before the aircraft returns to service. That's what I was just talking about. After evaluating Boeing's training proposal, regulators will make the final determination of what the actual training requirements will be. Regarding the 737 MAX flight deck displays, everybody gets the angle of attack indicator now. It's no longer an optional item. And the angle of attack indicator also comes with a AOA INOP light, AOA disagree light. Now let's go look and see what the FAA has to say in their Airworthiness Directive on the 737 MAX. After the crash of the first 737 MAX, the Lion Air crash, on November 7th, 2018, the FAA issued an Emergency Airworthiness Directive number 2018-23-51. That's the Emergency Airworthiness Directive that gave further guidance to flight crews about the condition of runaway stabilizer trim in the 737 MAX without specifically addressing the MCAS system on the 737 MAX. It's this AD that is going to be superseded that will provide the guidance to get the 737 MAX back into service. This new AD has just completed its public comment period and will be coming out soon. An Airworthiness Directive is a mandatory FAA requirement in order to maintain the airworthiness certificate of an aircraft. So in this new AD, which will supersede 2018-23-51, this proposed AD would require installing new flight control computer FCC software, revising the existing AFM airplane flight manual to incorporate new and revised flight crew procedures, installing the new MAX display system NDS software, changing the horizontal stabilizer trim wire routing installations. Remember, the wiring in the horizontal trim also, then the wiring to the horizontal stabilizer through the aft part of the fuselage came under scrutiny. Again, this is a problem because of having an aircraft that's been that's been modified so many times, 12 times over so many years since 1967 when the original type certificate came out from the 737. The wiring bundle met the requirements at the time of 1967, but those requirements have changed over the years, so they're now requiring that the 737 MAX wiring and wiring bundles come into compliance with the recent changes of aircraft wiring requirements. Completing an angle of attack sensor system test and performing an operational readiness flight. Now let's see what the FAA is recommending changing in the flight manual for the 737 MAX, specifically Runaway Stabilizer. In the Operating Procedures chapter, replace the existing Runway Stabilizer paragraph with the information in Figure 3. Here's Figure 3. Runaway Stabilizer. If uncommanded stabilizer movement occurs continuously or in a manner not appropriate for flight conditions, recall. This is basically from memory or from a quick reaction checklist up on the dashboard. Firmly hold control column. Disengage autopilot if engaged. Disengage auto throttle if engaged. Use the control column and thrust levers to control pitch, attitude, and airspeed. Use main electric stabilizer trim to reduce control column forces. If the runaway stops after the autopilot is disengaged, do not re-engage. Autopilot or auto throttle, end of procedure. If the runaway trim continues after the autopilot is disengaged, place both stab trim cutout switches to cutout. If the runaway continues, grasp and hold the stabilizer trim wheel. Remember, the 737 has all of the 737s, including the MAX, has the manual trim wheels located on either sides of the pilot pedestals, right there by your knees. Now, by reference, means by using a checklist, a more detailed checklist, trim the stabilizer manually. Notes: 1. A two-pilot effort may be used to correct an out-of-trim condition. That means there's a wheel on each side and there's a pair of hand cranks that are 180 degrees apart, and so it may take both pilots cranking on the trim wheel to get the thing back into a trim condition. But if Mcas is rigged correctly, it shouldn't get it in so far of an out-of-trim condition unless you fail to initially fly the aircraft. 2. Reducing airspeed reduces air loads on the stabilizer, which can reduce the effort needed to manually trim. Anticipate trim requirements. Do not re-engage autopilot or auto throttle. In addition to the normal descent approach and landing checklist, complete the following deferred items: establish landing configuration and in trim condition early on final approach. So a little more detail and expansion on the runaway stabilizer trim procedure. It's a little bit short of reinventing the very old technique of pulling the nose up and manually reeling the trim back into a trim position, much like you would on a fly rod or a fishing rod. That procedure was around many years ago, from all the way back to the Boeing 707, but has since been lost in the manuals. So that's some of the changes that's going on with the Boeing 737 MAX between the proposed airworthiness directive of the FAA and the folks at Boeing. They're working together very hard and very fast to try to get the 737 MAX back online. We'll keep you posted as we get more information about it. And thanks so much for your support of this channel, and thanks so much for your support over here on Patreon that makes this content even possible. See you here. Pete, where'd you go? Give us those 3 rules again. What are the 3 rules, Pete, in order?
Aviate, navigate, communicate.
That's right.